So good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining the part 2 of the Quarkus deep dive session. We will quickly go through what we discussed yesterday. Hope my screen is visible to everyone. I am showing the PPT right now.
Yes, nothing.
Okay. So we discussed about the introduction of Quarkus, then features of the Quarkus, why we use Quarkus, how the performance is improved in Quarkus, and then we built a small application using Quarkus. And we also saw how error messaging, error stack trace was tweaked in Quarkus. So these were a few of the slides which we saw yesterday. Quarkus is a container first driven application or architecture. And then some of its best features are unifies imperative and reactive programming approach. It uses best of Java breed standards and libraries. It is a container first tailored for GraalVM hotspot. Fast. It uses low memory and offers instant scale-up. It is tailored for Kubernetes framework, and it is a joy for developer. So these all things we already covered yesterday. And one major important point which we discussed yesterday was the boot up time and the startup time is faster in Quarkus because it reads all the classes which are required for our application and throws away the unnecessary classes. It also avoids reflection as much as possible. We saw this chart where we discussed like how Quarkus application takes less memory and it has fast boot up time. And we coded a sample application where we saw how code.quarkus.io acts as an initializer for Quarkus application. We saw how to build and compile, create packages. We built a simple application. We saw the dev UI, how to change the configuration properties. We also integrated Swagger UI with our application. So that was part of day 1. Now, today our agenda is to build a REST application which will support all the CRUD operations. The database which I have chosen today is Mongo DB. It doesn't matter which database we are choosing. Quarkus provides support for all the popular database. So let's go ahead and start building the application today. So I'll first hit code.quarkus.io, where we will bootstrap our application. Now, my plan today is to build a simple application which will have entities like person. That person can have few attributes like name, date of birth, and status. We will expose our entity and then try to save the data and perform CRUD operations on that person entity. So that's the brief of the application which we'll be building today. Now, we know that we have code.quarkus.io, which helps in initializing a bootstrap application. So first we need to choose what all things we require for our application. First thing to build a REST application, which I'll choose is REST Easy Reactive Jackson. Let me go ahead and check this. Next, I want to choose my database. So I'll go ahead and look for Mongo DB. So REST resource with MongoDB, Liquibase, MongoDB with Panache. I'll be choosing MongoDB with Panache Let me go ahead and check this one. And I also need Swagger. So I'll go ahead and check Small Ray Open API. Yesterday, I also showed how to integrate Swagger API with our application. So let me go ahead and check this. Now, I'll go ahead, I'll download this as a zip. Okay, I'll click on Save As. I'm downloading to any location of my choice, code.quarkus.zip. Open. So the application zip is downloaded here. Let me go ahead and extract it now. Extract here. Now my application is extracted. I'll go ahead and open it into the API, into the IDE of my choice. So Mongo DB with Panache, code with Quarkus. Mongo DB with Panache, code with Quarkus. So I go ahead, I choose this application. Now the README file I had already explained yesterday. We'll go ahead, we'll see what all default classes came in. So we have a greeting resource, which is hosted at the path hello. Let's check the POM file. So in the POM file, we see, since we selected MongoDB with Panache, we have the dependency available. We also selected REST Easy. Its dependency is also available. Then for Swagger API, we selected Quarkus, Small Ray, Open API. So all the three dependencies are present in our POM file. Now, once our application is ready, let's go ahead and run it before making any changes to ensure that the application which have been bootstrapped is working correctly. So I'll go ahead, I'll compile the application. It shouldn't take more than a minute. All right. Now, I don't have Docker started right now. That's why we are seeing the Docker warning. Once Docker will be up, we will not see those warnings. But our application, which is required for today, is listening to localhost 8080. As discussed yesterday, we can host it on any port by changing the configuration in application.properties. So application.property file is available here. Let's go ahead and listen to localhost 8080. We see a congratulations message, which means our Bootstrap application is ready. I can check the hello API. Yes, we are getting the response. And then we'll quickly make some changes. Instead of hello, let's change it to hello world. And then save the application, save the changes, and refresh the page here. We see hello world from REST-EG reactive. All right, so the changes are working fine. We have the Bootstrap application ready. Now, as discussed, I'll be creating a person entity because we need a person. We will expose that entity. So code with Quarkus. All right. I have already written the person entity. So let me go ahead and directly copy paste it. It will save time. Just a moment. All right, so we have code with Quarkus here. I will here. I'll put this thing here so that I'm pulling the backup code right now so that I can quickly copy paste. Start main, the DB. All right, Maven source, main Java onward entity. So there are two ways in which we can expose our API. One is via the entity approach. The other one is via the repository approach. So first we will try the entity approach. I'll go ahead, I'll create a package here called entity. All right, now inside entity, I'll go ahead and copy paste the person class. So that's pretty easy. I just go ahead and click on paste, click on OK. And now we have the person class, person entity ready. Now let me explain you what all things I have in this person entity. The person entity also needs enum, which is status. Let me go ahead and paste that status class as well. So inside entity, I go ahead and place the status. Now, the annotation, it's a person class. It is extending Panache Mongo entity. So Panache Mongo entity, we are able to extend because we injected the dependency of Mongo DB with Panache. Now, it comes out of box with Quarkus, Panache Mongo API. What it helps us is now we are able to use the @Mango entity. Mango entity here signifies that this particular person is an entity in MongoDB, right? The collection name here is the person. So inside Mongo person database, there is the person collection. We can correlate this with a SQL database. So assume if we have a database named person. Now, in that person, we have some table like the person. Now, my entity has three fields. One is name, the other one is birth date, and then the status. So currently status has living and deceased as the option. We can go ahead and modify it as many enum values as possible. So working or student or not applicable, right? Now, we don't even have to write the getter and setter methods here. The only reason you see I have written getter and setter methods here because I wanted to modify the behavior. Like name, I'm changing to 2 lowercase. If I'm not changing name to 2 lowercase, we don't even need the getter or setter. In the setter, I'm changing it to uppercase. So to modify the getter setter behaviors, I have written it here just for explanation purpose. However, even if we don't write the getter and setter, by default, the framework provides getter and setter for these attributes of person entity. Now, I have written few simple methods. So find my name. If I pass a name as parameter, then the framework will go ahead, look into the MongoDB person database, figure out, get the first result from that DB, which will match the name. Second, if I want to figure out how many people are living or how many are deceased or how many are working or student, right? So we have a very simple method. If you compare this with The actual Mongo DB methods, they are very complex, or any DAO classes which we go ahead and write in our application, they are very complex. But what Quarkus provides us with the help of Panache is to simplify the way in which we write our DAO classes. Now we just go ahead and write one-liner and we are able to fetch data from the DB. Similarly, to delete a specific name from the database, we have the delete method. We can introduce n number of methods as possible, like find by ID or find by person who are working, not just living. So all those sort of methods we can introduce here. Now, I already showed you the status class. Once our entity is ready, the next step is to create the resource class, right? So I'll go ahead. I've already written that class. I'll go ahead and copy paste it here. And then we will see how it works. So I go ahead, I paste this class here, and the person resource class is ready. Now in this class, the resource which I have created will be accessible at the path entity/persons. It consumes an application JSON, the request which we will trigger for the post, put, etc. will be using application JSON, and the output which it will produce is again application JSON. I'm calling this class as person resource. Now, once we are done with the person resource class, I have defined few of the methods here. Get, list all. So what it will do, it will go ahead and pull all the person in the person database and then populate the response. The other method which I have is get by ID. So if I pass the ID of a person.findBy will be returning me all the matching records. So in this case, since ID is unique, so it will return one specific record. Post method to create person in our database. Put method to update the value of the person in the database, and delete method by ID. Also search a person by name and delete all. So these are few of the REST operations, the CRUD operations, which I have introduced here. They are hosted at entity person. Now I'll go ahead and save this change. But right now, even though our entity is ready, right, but we don't have the database connected. So before I start moving to connect the database, I'll take a pause here and I'll check till now if it's clear to everyone, or do you guys have any questions? All right, I'll assume silence as no questions. Fine, so I'll proceed towards connecting the database. So till now, what we have seen, we created an entity. We extended the Panache Mongo entity. That helped us in simplifying the DAO objects, the DAO methods. So with just one-liner methods, we are able to fetch the results. And we also went ahead and created a resource. Now, once these things are ready, next step is I'll go ahead and key in the database credentials. So let me copy paste the database credentials here. Since I'm using Mongo DB and the DB is hosted on my local, so you see the host name as localhost. It is hosted at port number 27017. And the name of the database is person. I can show you how it looks in the Mongo DB interface. So let me disconnect and let me connect. So localhost 27017. If I am connected, apart from the out of box tables, I have the person entity and the person collection ready, right? Now, I already have some of the data in this. We will go ahead and now check if using this configuration, are we able to access the database or not? So till now, what we have noticed, I haven't compiled anything. Quarkus is compiling by itself. But right now, if I go ahead and hit our resource, which is hosted at person, let's see what it returns. So if I go to get all persons, and if I click on send, it straight away went ahead and returned the result. Even though I had not restarted or compiled the application. So all the compilation process is happening on the fly. And it takes, so once you see here, live reload total time 1.691 seconds. So it took less than 2 seconds, and then it connected to database. All the details are mentioned here. And when we triggered the request, it fetched the data and rendered it on the screen. I did not have to go ahead and do these things manually. Right? So these are few sample data which were already available. Next, what I'll do. So right now we saw person.listAll. This method was able to fetch all the data which was already available in the person collection. Now, let's test this method which says get path by ID. So find person by ID. What it does, whatever ID we supply, it checks in the database if that ID exists or not, and then it returns the value. So we will test both the positive and negative scenarios. Let me go to Postman. And I can take any ID, let's say this one. Create person entity, create person by ID. So if I change this and pass an ID here, then it returned me the ID result. This is how simple building a REST application with Quarkus is. And this REST application is not pulling data from in memory, but it is pulling the data from a database. So what Quarkus provides us is it helps in building an application quickly. It's kind of developer joy where I don't have to go ahead and restart or build manually. Everything happens on the fly. I just go ahead and write the code in the editor and the changes reflects on the fly. That's the beauty of Quarkus. Now let's test other get person by ID also work. Now let's test the put operation. So first I'll check this. We are getting all. Now we have Mahatma Gandhi, whose birth date was this, and his current status is deceased. If I want to delete this particular entry, so I go to the delete resource, and then I trigger. So I'll take the ID of that delete resource first, because if I don't pass any specific ID, then all the person in the database will be deleted. So first, let me take the ID. And then I go to delete. I click on send. So 204, which is successful. Now, if I go ahead and click on get all person, I should not see this record. So this was the previous response. Now, if I go ahead and click on it, okay. To update any entry, let's say my status has been updated as student. Instead, I want to change it as working. So I'll take this ID. I'll go to the update one. And instead of student, let me change it to working. So the reason why I'm choosing these values, because I have defined these values here. So living, diseased, working, student, not applicable. So I pick this working value. I pass it here, click on send, and I got 204, which is successful. Now, initially the value was student. Now it says working. To validate whether these are getting saved in the database or not, I come to Mongo DB. I close the connection, disconnect, and then connect again. Open the person database, right? And we see the values updated. It says working. We don't have the entry for Mahatma Gandhi, etc. So I'll pause here. This is one way of solving the CRUD operations using the entity approach. The other one which I'll discuss is the repository approach. So before shifting to the repository approach, I'll take a pause here and we'll wait for any questions. Is it clear? Is it not clear? At least the thumbs up.
It's clear, Nathan.
Okay. Great. How about others? A thumbs up would be great if you don't want to speak. Awesome. I see a couple, 3 people with thumbs up. All right. So these are few of the configurations which we tweaked. We provided the URL where the DB is hosted. It's on my local host and the database name is person. Now, since I'm using a local host DB, that's why I don't have any username credentials, etc. But assume a scenario where we are connected to real-time production database. Those database won't be exposed without credentials, right? So for them, we need to define all the properties. So let me show you how those things are done. Okay, so I take these from here. And then I'll not save this. These are just for information purpose. So we can go ahead and define the DB kind. So what kind of database we are using. If we want to use DB2, we will provide DB2 or SQL or any other database. Then the username of the database, the password of the database, the URL where the database is hosted, some reactive max size, the port at which the database is hosted, and the schema name of the database. Right? So for a SQL database, since I'm using Mongo DB on my local, I just needed a couple of properties. If we are trying to connect to a remote database, we have to pass all those credentials here. I'll go ahead and delete these. So that was a simple CRUD operation application using Quarkus. Now the second approach is via the repository approach. So I've already coded those classes. Let me pull the repository classes as well. So first of all, I'll go ahead and create a repository here, repository package. REPOSITORY. Right. So, but I don't want it here. I want it here. Okay. So I have the repository package. Again, since we are implementing the person, we are exposing the person entity, I need a person class in repository as well. So let me go ahead and copy the person class. I'll click on paste. All right. So our person class is ready. It is dependent on, again, the status. I will copy the status class as well. So inside the repository, paste. Right. So we have the status. Let me increase the value in the status. The values which we used in the entity one. All right. Now I'll go ahead. So the person entity remains almost the same as the previous one. So we have used the annotation @Mongo entity to define that this is an entity in the Mongo database. But this time we have an object ID. So we have introduced a new attribute, the ID. Currently, I'm not using it in my application, but if we want to use it, if I don't use it by default, the IDs get generated by Mongo database. If I don't want the default values, in that case, I can go ahead and leverage this attribute. So similar to the previous one, we have name, birth date, and status. And then I have overridden the getter and setter methods. If I don't want overridden values, so what these overridden methods are doing is in the database, when I showed you, even though whatever case I pass in the request, it is getting stored in the small letters. So that's the overridden logic which I have written. If I don't want to override these behaviors, we don't even need the getter and setter methods. The entity will only contain name, birth date, and status. That's all. And the framework would itself create the getter and setter methods during the build time, and then it is available whenever. Now, so my entity is ready. The repository person object status I've already pasted. Next thing, since we are trying to implement using the repository approach, I'll go ahead and create a class called person repository. Paste. Okay. So this is the person repository class. Again, in the entity approach, we had everything defined in the entity itself, defined by name, find alive, delete, likes. Here, these methods. So any method, any DAO methods, we can call it, which interacts with the database, we are putting it in the repository. And we are using a tag called application scope. Now, once our repository is ready, we need to expose the repository as a REST endpoint. So to expose it, I'll go ahead and create a person resource. Let me paste the person resource here. All right, I'm hosting the repository person resource as /repository person. Again, it consumes application JSON and produces a JSON. One difference which we see here is we are injecting the person repository where we have our DAO methods into the person resource class by using the annotation called inject. What this will help us is all the DAO methods of the repository will be available in this class using person repository. So again, we have the get all data from the DB. So person repository.list all. gives that data. Anything get /ID. This will return an object with the ID. Create person, persist the person. So when we create a person, we are persisting the details in the database and we are returning to not one. To update the data, we are using person repository.update. To delete, we are using to delete an ID. To delete with an ID, we have the find by ID, we find it, and then we go ahead and delete that person. We can search by name. We can also delete all the records. Now, what I've done here, I just wrote my classes. The framework in the backend went ahead and did everything for me. I just saved the classes. Apart from that, I have not done any other changes. Let's go ahead and check if everything is compiled properly or not. So I go to get all repository and then I click on send, right? So this is the latest result where we have the status as working. For Nitin, we don't have Mahatma Gandhi in the result because we deleted it. So this time, let's go ahead and create a person. So I'll go ahead and create Mahatma Gandhi. I'm passing the attribute as name, birth date, and status. Assume, so if I'm passing the format as wrong, instead of this format, I'll pass the date as 02/10/1869. Let's check if the entry gets created or not. Right? So it says I'm sending a bad request. Why? Because the birth date value which I have sent is not correct. What I'll do, I'll go ahead and correct the birth date format. And then let's try to hit trigger the request again. This time it gives me a message 201 created. So using the repository one, initially I don't have the Mahatma Gandhi entry here. I'm hitting to repository person. I click on send. And we see Mahatma Gandhi entry created. So if we look at the traditional style of our Java coding, right? Whenever we used to write any code, connect any database, or expose a REST API, it used to take a lot of time. So when I say a lot of time, those times were basically involved in first development, which is still here. So here also I am going ahead and writing the code. That's not changed between other like Spring Boot framework or Quarkus. So that still remains the same because developer has to go ahead and write the code. But what has changed is the time which is taken by and the memory which is taken by the framework to run that application. In Quarkus, that is super quick. In other applications, it's not. So, okay, what else do I have? So that was a simple CRUD application using Quarkus, where we saw create, update, delete, and get operations using two approach. First one, the entity approach. Second one, the repository approach. In the repository approach, we are injecting the person's repository. So whatever DAO methods which we wrote, we are injecting those DAO methods in the resource and then exposing our endpoints. Now, let's check how much memory this entire REST application is using. So I go ahead, I'll open CMD. And then I'll click on J console. So the application is here, scored with Quarkus. Nitin saying personal document code with Quarkus. Right, I go ahead, I click on connect. Since this is hosted on localhost, it's telling insecure connection, but that's fine. So I have been running this application since long, right? And we have hosted the REST API. We have connected to Mongo DB database. But still, if we see the number of classes loaded here, it is just around 15,000. If we will compare, so in tomorrow's session, we will be comparing Spring and Quarkus, that how it works. So the number of classes which will be loaded for a complete REST API will be way more in Spring than compared to Quarkus. And this is what helping us in saving the memory. We have been using this application since like last half an hour. Until now, the memory usage is way below 250 MB for the entire CRUD operations and the REST API. There are 38 live threads. And since I'm not hitting a request, the CPU usage is almost minimal. If I hit some request here like get all person, then we will see a spike in the CPU usage. So it rose by like 0.1%. And then it again came down. So that's how lightweight, supersonic, and subatomic Quarkus is. Hope this graph would give the clarity. If I would be running a similar REST application supporting CRUD operation on Spring, these all numbers would be super high. Now I'll take a pause here and then I'll wait for any questions if you guys have regarding how to build a application, REST application in Quarkus, or how to connect the database. Or I assume everything is super clear. Okay, I see people raising thumbs up. So things are super clear. Now, the agenda for today is complete. What I'll quickly go ahead and additionally show you guys is the Swagger API. So we built we exposed some endpoints today. Those endpoints are hosted in Swagger API. So let's click on Open API. Not here. Right, so these many endpoints we have hosted. By default, our application came with the Hello API, the bootstrapped application. We went ahead, we created n number of get, post, delete, put using both the entity and the repository approach. All the APIs are collated here. Now, next thing which I wanted to show you guys was the configuration. So yesterday we didn't had any application configuration entries. So if I go right now in config editor, you see here it says Quarkus Mongo DB connection string. This is the URL. If I want to change the URL, I have two options. I can go to application properties here, and I can edit this value. Or in a production environment, I would go to the config editor and just modify the values from here. And then Quarkus internally will build those changes. And these changes will reflect on the queue. Similarly, MongoDB database I had defined as person. Let's say tomorrow I have some other database name. I can quickly go ahead and modify these values from here. So the dev UI config editor comes out of the box in Quarkus. Now, having said that, I want to also show you how easy it is to test application. I'll go ahead and close this application and quickly bring up a simple code with Quarkus. Okay. Now, what I did, I closed the previous Mongo DB application. I just wanted to show you guys how easy it is to write test classes. So when we bootstrap our any application, this is the application which we wrote yesterday on day one, the simple bootstrap application. So we have a test package provided by default. And these test classes are available here. So greeting resource, hello world. Out of box, it had hello from REST easy reactive. Let's go ahead and start this application. It shouldn't take more than 30 seconds. And the application should be ready. All right, so by default, what I've done, I've paused the test. The message in the console, if you see here, it says test paused. The application is already hosted on ATA. This is the application which we wrote on day one. Now, I have few test classes which are already provided when we bootstrapped our application. So greeting resource test. So what greeting resource test says? That if someone hits the URL hello, the status code return should be 200 and the body should say hello from REST easy reactive. Now, if I go to greeting resource, it says hello from REST easy reactive. That's fine. I hit this URL and then I go to hello. So I have this message which is working as expected. Now I'll go ahead and run the testing. So to run or resume the testing, I need to press R. I go ahead and press R here. Now it is running the test classes. It ran greeting controller. It says all 2 tests are passing. 2 tests were run in 5 to 52 milliseconds. So let's go ahead and modify our code a little bit. Instead of hello, I'll go ahead and write hello world. Right? The moment I saved, by default, Quarkus started building our changes. Right? And it's throwing a message that one test failed. Why this test failed? Because my method is returning hello world from REST easy. But what we have in our test class, it says hello from REST easy. So to accommodate the change, I'll have to modify my test methods as well. The moment I modify my test method, I didn't do anything. I just went ahead and saved the application. It says all 2 tests are passed. So that's how easy it is to test application in Quarkus. Everything is running on the fly. It's like a developer's dream that I want to code some application or I want to test some application. I don't have to spend time in restarting my server or restarting my application, which usually consumes a lot of time. So tests are passed. I go ahead, I refresh the page. It says hello world. And if I intentionally make some mistakes, right? The compilation errors, those are also listed here on the fly. Assume it is a front-end application. And if someone have made some mistake in the code, they'll be able to see the results here as well. So I go ahead, save it, error unclosed string. So I have the messages. The developer has the messages here that you need to go ahead and correct your code. Till then, my application is not responding here because it has compilation errors. I go ahead and fix the error. Save it again. Since I'm running it in test mode, all tests are passed. compilation error is gone. I refresh, everything works as a charm. All right, so we can either stop the test, toggle the test output, H for more options to quit the application, etc. Now, yesterday I showed you one more. I showed you the README file. I'm not sure if it is not loading right now, but the README file had few messages where we say, how can we package a jar? So we go ahead and write mvn w hyphen package. That packages the application into a single jar. We can create Uber jars as well, where all the libraries will be copied into the jar rather than keeping the libraries in the code. And then we can run the jar in real time or deploy it as a Lambda in any of the cloud application. So that's all what I had for today as part of building a REST API supporting CRUD operations using Quarkus. All right, I will go back to my PPT. So now tomorrow, the agenda is to figure out what are the differences between Spring and Quarkus, and when to use Quarkus and when to use Spring. So all those differences and in real time, how much memory they consume, all those comparisons we'll be doing tomorrow. And which one to use in which scenarios, even we'll be throwing lights on them in the third session of Quarkus Deep Dive. I'll wait for questions now. Okay, I hope today's session was super clear. No one is asking any questions. Or maybe it was not clear at all.
Hi, Nitin.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, there are different types of injections in Spring Boot, like construction level injection, setter level injection, field level injection. Here we are using Advait of inject. Only that is available.
We have so almost all those native Java injections which you can think of. They are available in Quarkus as well. So one of the injection thing which I showed you in the code was, let me bring up that. Open recent Mongo DB with Panache. All right, so one of the injection which I showed you in the entity class was, even though I did not go ahead and modify it, by default, the framework injected it. So that was the getter and setters. If you see, I have overwritten the getter and setter only for the name, right? But there are other two fields as well, like birth date or status, right? I haven't defined their getter and setters, but on the build time and during the runtime, those getters and setters are injected by the framework by default. So those native Java annotations, they are also available in Quarkus. Things which you can think of in Spring Boot, they are available in Quarkus. Hope that answers your question, right?
Yes. And another one is like, by default, if you use Spring WebFlex, it uses native, right?
Correct.
Here also it uses native.
Yeah. So Spring supports WebFlex. Here we use native. All those comparisons we'll be doing in tomorrow's session between Spring and Quarkus.
Okay,
sure. So I have deep dive sessions on them planned tomorrow. Any other questions? So one of the beauty which you would have, I hope you guys have some exposure, or at least most of the exposure to Spring Boot, right? So one of the awesome feature which we saw here was the application.properties. You saw I did not even go ahead and build, or on the runtime, my application was running. In the runtime, I went ahead, I pasted these entries here, and it automatically reflected in the REST API. These things were not achievable earlier using Spring Boot. I know Spring Boot can go ahead and then provide these features in the future, but I don't think they are available as of now. Softwares keep on changing through the time. But as of now, these are like one of the best features which are available in Quarkus, which differentiates Quarkus from Spring Boot. The other framework which is available, which has this kind of functionality, is Micronaut. But both Quarkus and one of the drawback of Quarkus is this is news. I mean, it is available since like last 3-4 years. So not many people are aware. Not many contribution is happening in Quarkus if you compare it with Spring Boot, because Spring Boot has been in place since, I believe, like 7 to 8 years. I'm not sure of the exact date, but close to 7 to 8 years. So many developers are already available in Spring Boot, but in Quarkus, you will find very few community developers. So that's one of the drawback of Quarkus.
So Nitin, one more question.
Hmm.
Yeah, so what about that external jars? Like for example, a Lombok, if there is an external jar and we directly add to an IDE, whether
So
it will take automatically or we need to build it?
the moment, so the only thing which you will have to do is, but I don't think you need Lombok, because the framework itself provide support to inject getter setters. Lombok's responsibility is to inject constructor, getter setters, etc.
Yeah, exactly.
So
So that was for an example, but if in case if external jar is there that we have downloaded and we are adding that to IDE directly, then whether this will take it directly or we need to build it.
Quarkus takes it directly. The only thing we'll have to go here, if it is not taking it directly, is to load the Maven changes.
Okay.
So whenever we go ahead and inject few dependencies, right, the POM file gets updated. If we are building a Maven application, the POM file gets updated. So in the beginning, I showed you that I injected these dependencies, right?
Yeah.
I think in yesterday's session, I showed you that my application was running, and then I injected the dependency of Quarkus small ray open API to implement Swagger, to integrate Swagger with our application. I didn't go ahead and restart the application. I just went ahead, clicked on Maven reload. It resolved the dependency by downloading it, and then I was able to access the Swagger API in the UI.
Okay.
So even the dependencies part, it works on the fly. I mean, it's a developer charm. It saves a lot of time. You saw we wrote such a complex application so quickly, even though I was explaining in detail, but the amount of effort which I put into making my application ready was minimal. Hope that answers your question.
Yes, I'm good.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? All right, then. I'll assume silence as no, and hope today's session was interesting. Let's catch up tomorrow. Again, same time, to distinguish between Spring and Quarkus and when to use what. And we will see a few more features of Quarkus. Thank you and have a great day ahead.
Thank you.